the key to progress is having the courage to start something when you're not ready, but believing yourself enough to know you will figure it out along the way. And I think realizing that all of the people you admire, that you look at as successful, that you put on a pedestal, they don't have some magical roadmap or magic 8 ball giving them the answers or showing them the way. They've just realized that, and they're willing to start things and figure it out as they go. And it turns out a lot of the time that it will work out. And so I just encourage other people to kind of adopt that mentality.
How do you stay motivated as a pilot?
It ebbs and flows. I think a lot of people have the misconception that you're just automatically motivated because it's a cool job. Especially with the Thunderbirds, right? Something so visible. You're in front of all these people and everyone's like, ooh, like the show is impressive. And that's the goal. And so it can be hard for people to understand that you can get burned out, you can get down, you can have those bad days when you're doing something so cool. But it becomes a job. It's, like I said, high stress, high stakes, and that can wear on you. And so for me, it was reminding myself why I applied to be on the team in the first place. And it wasn't the cool flying. It wasn't to do that really unique type of high stakes flying. It was actually to motivate other people and inspire other people. And I would think about the interactions that I got to have with little kids, especially with little girls who were seeing someone that looked like them doing something that seemed almost superhero-esque. And I could see that on their faces, how impactful that was for them. And so, when I would get tired and it was late in the season, I hadn't seen my family in weeks and all of the things, I would reflect on those moments where I saw that impact happening. And I would try to remind myself that that one interaction for me might be the 100th one I did that day, but for that person, it might be the only one they ever have with someone in my position. And so however I interact with them, I have the power to uplift them and plant the seed of inspiration, or I have the power to leave a really negative interaction in their minds, right? Like, she was cold. She clearly didn't want to talk to me. She was in a hurry. And so I would remind myself of why I went through all the effort to compete and to get into such a high stakes environment. And that really kept me motivated, even when the days and the months and the weeks got long.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having a strong why is just so important with anything you're trying to do. I want to ask you about imposter syndrome a little bit. So for those that don't know, imposter syndrome is the inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been achieved as a result of your efforts. This, from what I've read, is something that you've dealt with in your life. When did this apply to your life, and how do you deal with it?
It's applied at all different points in my career. Early on is when it was definitely the worst, and when I wasn't very equipped to deal with it. It still pops up even now, but I have much better perspective on it. My first assignment, I'd gone through all those years of training. I get to Misawa, Japan, which is my first combat squadron. Misawa is a really isolated, smaller city. It's way up in the northern part of Japan. Generally, English is not widely spoken there. You're isolated, I guess. And so your squadron, your wingmen, and your unit become your everything. They're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your family on holidays. They become everything. And so I step into that environment, and I'd gone through all these years of training, and they had gone pretty well. And you feel like you should be fairly equipped when you get to that point. And when I got there, I actually discovered that what I had learned up to that point was just the tip of the iceberg. That being a fighter pilot was way more complicated than the actual physical flying of the airplane. That was something that you had to get to the point where you could do it in the periphery in your sleep practically, because you had to be monitoring all these sensors, understanding your weapon systems, understanding the enemy's weapon system, understanding other platforms, other good guy platforms that are working together with you. And it's very complex. You're multitasking, you're thinking way ahead, you have to have situational awareness of 3 dimensions on a huge scope. And I got there, and in hindsight, I think I was probably a pretty average brand new wingman. But up until that point, I had done well at things. Like, I had, got a scholarship, I had gotten a pilot slot, and then I'd gotten a fighter jet, which was just against the odds. And I'd made it through all these courses, and all of a sudden I get to Misawa, and there's just so much information to learn that no matter how many hours a day I put in trying to learn it, I could not get my arms around it. It was going to take months and months and months. And that was new for me. And so it kind of shook my identity of like, do I even belong here? Like, who am I if I'm not the person that's good at this stuff, if I'm not like above average at everything? And I also really felt like I had to put on this facade to fit into the squadron. I had some were accurate and some were misconceptions. I had this idea of what being a fighter pilot meant. And in my mind, everyone was very type A, everyone was very assertive, very confident. And I'm more soft spoken and reserved. And I was a really shy kid. I'm a little bit more introverted. And I'm also very empathetic. And I like feel like I focus more on EQ type skills. And that just isn't necessarily what comes out at the forefront in that environment. And so you layer that in with being one of two women in the squadron of about 50 people. And I did feel like I was under a microscope and I really felt like I had to prove myself. So I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't show vulnerability. I couldn't ask questions when I had them because I didn't want people to realize I didn't know the answer already. And all of this created this perfect scenario where I felt very isolated. I felt like I didn't deserve to be there. Like this was the wrong career path for me, even though I worked so hard to get there. And I really felt like no one else was experiencing that. And in hindsight, having talked to some of the other people that were young in their career at the same squadron at the same time, they all felt that way. Maybe not the gender part of it, but they all felt like they were trying to establish a reputation in this new community. Like they were trying to learn so much information that it was overwhelming, but I felt very isolated. And so I think a huge part of dealing with it is getting perspective that it is not an uncommon thing, that you are not the only one experiencing it, and sharing that you're struggling with that feeling with other people who are in similar experience level to you. I almost guarantee that as soon as you're like, man, I really feel like I don't belong here, like sometimes I'm questioning if this is the right decision, if I'm ever going to be good enough, they're going to be like, thank you for sharing that because I feel the exact same way and no one talks about it. So I think recognizing that it's common and that it's just part of being a beginner at something and then sharing it with other people, connecting with other people. And that connection also allows you, if you're willing to be vulnerable and admit that you're struggling a little bit or you feel like concepts aren't coming as quick as you want, people are going to show up for you. You're going to find those mentors that can help you work through that. But the only way to get those close relationships and build those connections is if you're willing to drop those walls a little bit and be vulnerable with people. And I didn't discover that until probably 3 or 4 years into flying the F-16. My second assignment when I was in Texas, that's where I got to deploy. Did a lot of stuff there that I really grew a lot as a pilot and just as a person. And it was from that assignment that I eventually applied to the Thunderbirds. And had I not gone through that period of growth there where I kind of realized all these things and I found a really great community within my squadron and I started showing up just as myself instead of trying to play fighter pilot dress up, I would have never even had the courage to apply to the Thunderbirds because it's intimidating and there's a good chance of failure. And so just recognizing that, like, it is so common. I still deal with it now. I just have perspective on it that it's normal and I don't let it stop me from taking action.